Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we will be recapping Game 5 of the Stanley Cup Finals between the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Dallas Stars. The Lightning 1 game away from winning the 2020 Stanley Cup. Just needed to take this Game 5, but the Stars would stand in their way, would extend this series to a Game 6 by taking the victory here 3-2 in double overtime. This one would start off late in the first period with a Dallas Stars goal from Corey Perry to make it 1-0. Then the Lightning in the second would tie it up off the back of a Palat goal to make it 1-1. In the third period, early on, Sergachev would make it 2-1 Lightning, but Pavelski in the last few minutes of the third period would tie it up, and we would be 2-2 heading to a second straight overtime. As I said in the previous game, both these teams with a lot of success in overtime. The Stars were undefeated up until Game 4, and after a scoreless first overtime, they managed to get the game winner from Corey Perry, his second of the game, to extend the series here. Good news for the Dallas Stars. I had mentioned in the previous two games that I had yet to really see the Dallas Stars push the pace here in this series. Mostly they were just keeping it even, and when it wasn't an even game, it was the Lightning who were taking control. But we finally got to see that side of the Stars here. It's pretty disappointing that it took to all the way where they're on the brink of elimination. Game 3 down 2-1 in the third period. But we finally did see it. After this goal was scored by Sergachev, it just completely turned over to the Dallas Stars side. You just could tell with the way they were playing that they were going to be able to tie this game. Whether they would win it or not was still obviously in the air, but they would tie it. They were just pushing. The Lightning looked like they had zero opportunities to be able to stop this Stars team, and eventually the Pavelski goal happens. Now, of course, after that, it seems as though the Stars just sort of went back to being kind of mediocre and playing some very even hockey, which was kind of disappointing to see. I thought once they really built up that momentum there and got that Pavelski goal, that they'd really stick it to the Lightning and they could potentially even win in regulation. But while they ended up winning the game, it didn't necessarily go as cleanly as I thought it would after that series of play. But before I get on to the bad news, I should also mention another player here. Last game I mentioned Tyler Seguin. This game I'll mention Corey Perry. Now not a lot was made about the signing of Corey Perry during the offseason. Obviously Pavelski was the bigger signing. Corey Perry had seemingly become a bit washed up after a pretty steep fall off with the Anaheim Ducks. This is his first season with the Dallas Stars, and during the regular season he absolutely wasn't really anything special. But here in these playoffs, while it hasn't been necessarily great for him, he really has stepped up in these past couple of games here. And of course, with it being the Stanley Cup Finals, these are the most important games of these playoffs. So yes, he wasn't super effective through the first few series, but very good in these past couple of games, scoring a lot of these gritty style of goals. Corey Perry has always had that sort of style of play. I would know, having watched him so long with the Anaheim Ducks as a Sharks fan. So good games for him, and comes up clutch for the Stars. The bad news for them is, of course, what I was mentioning, is that they had that extended period of play where they were so good, but it seems as though once they scored the Pavelski goal, they decided to just back off. The rest of the third period seemed to be like, would the Lightning be able to score another go-ahead goal? And then, of course, in the first overtime was just disastrous for the Stars. They were very lucky to escape those 20 minutes, having not lost the game and been eliminated from the playoff, because the Lightning were just pushing. Had it not been for multiple key blocked shots from the Stars, like Pavelski and Janmark, they probably would be out of the bubble at this point. But they stave off that first overtime. They come out with a pretty solid second overtime, and as I said, they get the victory. I would have liked to see a bit more of that Stars team that we saw for about 10 or so minutes in the third. On the Lightning side, the good news for them is, of course, they're still in a pretty decent spot in this series. They were up 3-1, so they could technically afford to lose a game. And this is, of course, eerily similar to how the series in the previous round went against the New York Islanders. The Lightning were up 3-1 in that one as well. And then in Game 5, lost in double overtime to a Jordan Eberle goal. Lightning now losing in double overtime to a Corey Perry goal. And against the Islanders, they end up finishing it off in Game 6. We'll see if the Lightning can do the same thing here. So good position for them. And I do think that all in all, through these, I guess, how many minutes did they play? Maybe 85, 90 minutes that they played in this game. I do think that the Lightning actually played well enough to win. Had they scored an overtime goal and taken the series and taken the Stanley Cup, I would have said they absolutely would have deserved it. The Dallas Stars are the team who manages to emerge with the victory, but I don't think this is necessarily bad news for the Lightning. On to the bad news for the Lightning, however. I've been very impressed with most of the players on the Lightning side. Obviously, their first line has been extremely impressive. Palat, Kucherov, Point. I've also been very happy with their third line, which is Coleman, Goodrow, and Gourde. And then, of course, the fourth line for the Lightning, at least tonight, it was Verhaeghe, Maroon, and Paquette. Aren't necessarily super impressive, but then again, they're the fourth line. The line that really is standing out for me here is Killorn, Cirelli, and Johnson. They're technically second line. It just hasn't really been good enough offensively through this series. I don't think these players necessarily have been bad, but I do need to see a bit more from them. Tyler Johnson just not really doing anything. I think he's pointless in this series. Killorn did have a goal in the previous game, but he's otherwise been rather ineffective. Cirelli with just a couple of assists through this series. And this is a second line we're talking about. This isn't some fourth line like the Maroon line I pointed out earlier that can sort of just coast on the fact that they're not getting scored against, let's just say. This is a second line that is expected to contribute offensively, and all three of these players have been, mediocre for the Lightning throughout these playoffs. Now, I don't think it's 100% necessary that these players score goals for the Lightning to win games. They've managed to do so for mostly throughout these playoffs without these three players contributing all that much. But I do think if this second line can step up a bit for the Lightning will have a lot easier chance of closing out this series. But that will do it for this recap. In terms of my prediction, I had said the Lightning would take it in 6 games, and now we are perfectly in line for that to be able to happen. The Stars, with this game victory, now trail in this series 3-2. If the Lightning win Game 6, that will make my prediction perfect. Now, that isn't to say that it will happen, but it's looking pretty good. Class dismissed.